Welcome back to Sparkle on Substack with me, Claire Venus. I'm so excited because on this cozy afternoon, I have Sharon Blackie here with me. We're going to chat all things writing and Substack, and we're just going to see where the conversation takes us. I do have a little question from one of my members, which is a beautiful question to ask Sharon. But other than that, yeah, we're just going to see how this conversation takes shape. I've loved Sharon's work for years, so I'm quite starstruck, but you'll bear with me. Sharon, welcome. It's so lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm good and it's lovely to be here. It's actually the first time that I've talked about Substack,
Oh,
to
is it?
anybody.
Oh,
So
great.
who knows where we'll go.
Yeah, brilliant. And for the people listening who haven't come across your work before or are a little bit curious about what it is, would you mind just giving us a bit of an introduction to what started you writing in this way and what brought you into the Substack realm as well?
I'm a psychologist by training and also have a background, an academic background in folklore and mythology. So I've always worked with story kind of in my psychology practice. And when I began to write, I had my first book published in 2008, which was a novel. And then when I began to write nonfiction, it was kind of natural for me to put those two things together and, just in the same way that I did in my therapeutic practice. And so really what my passion is, I suppose, is for exploring women's stories and particularly looking back to older stories where women in our traditions, kind of Britain and Ireland in particular, were really quite powerful, and had a lot of really interesting characteristics. And it's always seemed to me that in a world where often women just don't know how to be, what it means, even to be a woman sometimes, those old stories were very helpful to me. So they're kind of the basis of all of my writing, whether that's fiction or non-fiction. So yeah, I've just handed in my seventh book, and it's going to be published next year. So yeah, plenty of books out there.
Oh, wonderful. And what's the seventh book called, Sharon?
It's going to be called Ripening: Why Women Need Fairy Tales Now.
Oh,
It's out next May, and it's very much about how these old stories kind of orient us to a world. I mean, every fairy tale heroine story starts with absolute catastrophe.
mm,
Everything's broken. She's lost everything. She's walking out of the door with nothing. And by the end of it, she's transformed the entire story, always with the help of
mm.
others, not in the kind of heroic, swashbuckling, individual glory sense. So it's really about how they teach us, what they teach us about how to live in troubled times. So I
Oh,
hope it'll be
beautiful.
topical.
And a balm for us all as well. I really find with myself, and because I am immersed in a lot of fairy story at the moment with reading to my children, I really find that that is a balm for me at the end of the day. I think when you work online, you're sort of at the witness of everybody that else is online that day. And as much as we try and curate our spaces, there are things that can just fly in. And I just find it very grounding to be rooted in story in the evenings, and even story that is the stories that I read as a child as well, just being able to revisit those. And there's something about my breath slowing down and just kind of holding the kids in story. And it's amazing. The more traditional stories, or even some that now, you might think, oh, well, I read them as a kid, but actually this is going into quite a dark path, going down quite a dark path. My daughter, she's four, she's fascinated. And she's such a little wild woman. She has been since she was born. She sort of is very fierce and she knows what she's here to do. And it's felt like a real kind of coming together of feminine essence between her and I, because I'm quite introverted, I'm quite gentle. I worked in festivals and events, but it all felt performantry. And Luna just knows who she is. It's like, I'm here, this is what I'm here to do. So when I read those stories and they kind of swirl around between the two of us, it's real magic, actually. So yeah, I adore your work and I can't wait for that book next year.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because fairy stories were very much, I mean, academic research has shown that they were largely, not exclusively and not in every country, but mostly women's stories. And they would have been passed down,
Mm,
by grandmothers to their daughters and to their daughters. When they were doing the domestic work, they would have been told, basically, I think, to teach the kids that, okay, the world out there can be really terrible. It's hard, it's dangerous, but look, you can still get through and there's still magic in it.
Yeah, so much magic. Absolutely. Yeah, there's something really beautiful that holds us in it all, isn't there? A lovely thread to circle back to. When obviously with your writing, that was quite a while ago now when you started writing books. Were you writing on the internet around that time as well, like 2008? Were you blogging or did that come a little bit
Yeah.
later?
Yeah, back in 2008, we were actually, my husband and I had set up a small literary publishing house when we were living in
Oh,
Scotland. So we were blogging around, or I was blogging around that and kind of books in general.
mm,
Um, but it wasn't really a big thing at the time. It had only just begun blogging. And then eventually, and particularly after we closed the business down. So I would say I began blogging for myself about my own work, my own thoughts and writing, probably around 2011, 2012.
yeah.
And I kind of blogged ever since, but in bits, because,
Mhm.
blogging, and this is where I think Substack has become interesting for those of us who
Mm,
are professional writers. Blogging was a lot of work and you didn't get paid for it.
mhm,
And it didn't always pay off in the sense of bringing new readers in. I mean, it might have satisfied existing readers, but there wasn't really a kind of infrastructure um, in the world, in the kind of blogging world where you could kind of be discovered. And
mm,
so it felt like you were pouring all of this time and energy into a bit of a black hole. So I would keep like blogging and I'd call the blog something, it was called Re-Enchanting the Earth at one point. And then I had another blog that was called The Art of Enchantment, actually, on my website.
mm,
And then I would stop and just kind of lose heart and not really know what I was doing it for.
mm,
And it wasn't until I became aware of Substack, it must have been in 2020, very early 2022, maybe the year before, with some writers that I knew who had migrated onto the platform. And it just began, as I kind of followed them, it just began to seem to me as if finally someone had, you know, provided a platform that was going to bring just lovers of good writing
mhm.
to it of all kinds and this possibility for discovery. So that kind of invigorated the kind of article writing, blogging habit that I'd never really been able to stick to.
And isn't it interesting that there were strands of what you were writing back then, and obviously all of your research and everything in your book that then in the right place at the right time? Because when you look at your Substack from the outside in, and you're just like, this is epic. It's prolific. It's such a brilliant and beautiful space. You do your free newsletter, but then also you've got the beautiful paid space as well. It feels like stepping into a portal, and that's no mean feat. You've created that, and obviously from 2022 to now, we're only in a few years. It does feel like an absolutely incredible invite and portal to the people that you are here for, really, to attract. Is that how it feels from your side when you open your laptop and you kind of step into it? Did you have a vision from the start, or have you just been kind of chipping away and working it through?
Making it up as I go along.
Yeah.
No, I didn't really. I just thought it would be a lovely place to kind of share articles and to share writing
Mm,
that didn't fit into a book. And I always had a lot of that. And it was only kind of over time that it began to be clear to me that there was some coherence that could be formed.
mhm,
And it has just completely evolved over time. So I first started it in about May 2022. I imported a very small number of articles from my pre-existing blog. And then I would say probably over that year, began to really focus in on what I was doing and where I was offering value rather than just kind of like, expressing opinions into the void. So it wasn't really a plan, but I think I'm very clear about it now.
mm,
I know exactly what it is that I'm doing. It's been easier for me, I think, than for a lot of writers, only in the sense that, certainly for nonfiction, I write about specific areas of kind of knowledge. And so there's always something to write about psychology or mythology or folklore, that's
mm,
outside the realms of a book. I mean, if you love it and you're passionate about it and it's kind of your life, which it is for me, there's always something to share, even if it's just a story that's really struck you. So I always seem to have a kind of stream of content, whereas for a lot of writers, particularly if they're fiction writers, it's very hard sometimes for them to do that, except perhaps in a very personal way. So it just seems like it's kind of tailor-made in a sense
Mm.
for the kind of stuff that I'm working with and writing about.
Beautiful. And the way that you separate out your newsletter, which obviously you've got a tab on your Substack there so people can click that. And from what I could tell, that's the free area. And then you have the paid for area. Does it feel like a paid newsletter? Does it feel like a membership? Is it a hub? Is it a community? Have you got any words for what it is?
Um, Community is a word that I'm struggling with on Substack at the moment, to be
Mm,
honest, because I think that's really for me where Substack fails.
mm,
In the sense that, yes, I brought when I came to Substack, I had a maybe 20,000 mailing list through MailChimp. And now my newsletter, the free newsletter, is like 57,000 or something.
mm.
So it's clearly grown. MailChimp, of course, and back in the day when, you just had kind of newsletters like that, don't allow you to create any sense of community because there's nowhere, unless they reply, there's nowhere for them to kind of talk to you and to each other. Substack does provide that, so if I put my newsletter out or I put any article out, people can comment on it and I can reply. But I feel that apart from the Zoom calls that I do, so on for paid subscribers, every month I do what I call a myth and fairy tale salon, where we get together on Zoom. I do an audio recording of a fairy tale or a myth that I'd like them to work with. And they get that sent out so that they can listen to it. And then we meet on Zoom to talk about it. And I can see that there's a community of people there. There's a cohort of my paid subscribers who come along as often as they can and will comment on it. But I don't feel that there's much opportunity for engagement. And that's a kind of interesting thing because what I want Substack to be really is a place that showcases writing.
Mm,
But it does feel when you've got the kind of work that I'm doing that really is drawing people in to engage with a story, I don't think it's necessarily the best platform for it. Now,
mm,
I don't use chat because I don't find it works for my community. I've had chat out there either just for paid subscribers or just for founding subscribers, and it doesn't seem to quite take off around my work. I know some people find it does, but also it feels very separate.
mm,
And I don't like the look of it. It's not particularly functional. But
mm.
if you put out a Substack article and there are comments, I mean, people can't share images, for example, do you know?
Yeah.
So I think if you're looking for community, it's kind of hard. But if your real aim is to kind of showcase your work and your thoughts and your ideas and get that out there, then it's probably still the best platform that there is.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously they've added in a lot of different elements to it from when we started writing there in 2022, 2023, when it was quieter, and it definitely was a showcase for writers and a place where you could curate articles and re-sort them and put them back in front of your audience. And it felt like that for us, it wasn't about churning out huge amounts of volume of things. It wasn't about holding space in lots of different ways for lots of people all over the world. It was really about the work, and now we've added in different bits and we've added in spaces for depth of connection. But yeah, the internet is distracting. And so where we might be, and I feel this with my work as well, where I'm looking for depth of connection, I'm really looking for people to witness wherever the call's taken them to or wherever the question's taken them to. Sometimes what I'm finding is that timeline is just a lot longer than it once was.
Right.
So when I had more of I call it the attention economy, but when I had more of the attention economy, it felt like the conversation could flow in real time. Now I feel like I'm trying to pull people back in all the time to continue the conversation, and the conversation's got a much longer timeline. So I've only sort of really settled into that this year, but I do think it is the way the internet hijacks our brains because I'm on there too. And like I know that the way that I've consumed Substack and the internet has changed. And so I don't know what we do about it, but I do think it's wonderful to be able to connect with like-minded people and have the intimacy of a paywall as well. That's the bit that I love.
I guess so. I mean, I think what I really loved about Substack, actually, most of all, rather than just kind of finding a place where my own audience could read my work and engage with it, is I loved, back in 2022, and all the way probably, I can't remember when notes came in,
The
but
following year, I
the
think. So I
following year.
think
So
we'd
yeah,
had
so
about a
when,
year.
yeah,
Hmm.
so when notes first started, it was great because there weren't very many people on it, I suppose.
Mm,
And I
hmm.
made some really interesting connections there with other writers that
Yeah,
I've never really
same.
been able to make
Hmm.
anywhere else because, Instagram and Facebook are just like complete free-for-alls and utterly
Mm,
bonkers. And it was just lovely. I just made kind of contacts with writers that I wouldn't normally come across. And then that's all gone now. And I feel that as a loss. And I think that's for two reasons. It's not just volume of others coming into Substack and being part of it. I think it is the way that they have been pushing it as a social media platform.
mm,
I mean, quite overtly, they're
mm,
not trying to
hmm,
hide it.
hmm,
And I don't like that. I don't,
mm,
that's not what I wanted from Substack. So
hmm,
the beauty of notes, which is that ability to make connections, it's still there, but it's very, very much harder. And instead, now what you've got is just like you've got on Facebook and Instagram, you've just got this cacophony of voices,
mm.
and an algorithm that's completely incomprehensible.
Yeah.
And that puts me off because I'm not actually much of a consumer, never have been a
Mm,
consumer of the web.
mm.
I loved Facebook back in the day when actually it was to communicate with your friends.
Yeah.
Not been that a
Yeah.
long time ago. I'm
Hmm.
not a scroller. I'm just not really very interested in that kind
Hmm.
of. I'm too old, I
Hmm.
suppose. I didn't come to it
Well, but I think
early
it's
enough.
about depth as well, Sharon, because I think we can change the way our own attention works. And I think when I'm immersed in books, like I'm in an audiobook at the minute, I feel I'm in it. I feel like part of me is in it, and that just changes everything. Like I'm not interested in anything else, when I'm captured. But I think because they're so clever, especially with kind of more of the negative hooks, and I have to be careful because I'm quite sensitive. So when they brought in the news feed, like I was outraged and just said it. I
Yeah.
was like, I don't want this. This isn't something that I have in my life. I don't want to know the news. I know people will tell me, but also it's so manipulative, and it also at a cellular level keeps us frightened and scared, and then probably feeds, well, does feed consumerism and stuff. And I'm so trying to opt out and just be with my allotment. Do you know what I mean? And like walk the dog. It's just like, oh, how do I keep honoring that in myself? The deep will that I want to stay connected so that I can do the best creative work that I can whilst also doing it on the internet. It's like a real mind puzzle.
It is, and I think it depends very much. I mean, to me, I found focus very much easier as I've got older. I think in many ways that's what the second half of life is
Mm,
about.
hmm.
It's about really kind of having the ability to filter out all the stuff that you don't need, and focusing in on what actually matters to you and what's yours to do. And I have found it just easier just to really not use notes. Except very occasionally, I
Yeah.
think to myself, oh, I'll put up a photograph of three dogs at my writing desk watching me work or something.
Hmm.
But I try to keep it relevant to my work as opposed to just telling people I've just eaten a bacon sandwich or something. And but I don't. I think that's a choice that I have to make in order to keep
Mm,
myself sane, so that I don't see, as you say, all of the bells and whistles and all of the nonsense that they're adding in, and I focus it as much as I can on my own Substack page, and trying to get as much engagement as I can there. And just like, every now and again, if I've got nothing to do for 5 minutes, I'll have a look at notes. But really, it's
mm,
just not. And it is possible to do that. I mean, I do want to kind of encourage people to do that if notes bothers you. It's not necessary to be on notes, I don't think. I mean, I do see if I put a note out there and it's particularly popular, I might get a couple of, paid subscribers or something.
mm,
But I don't want that at the cost of my own sanity, feeling that
mm.
I've got to, be keeping an eye on it all the time.
There's a beautiful wisdom there as well, because it's been one of my most frequently asked questions when people are learning what Substack is and can be for their work, or they're trying to find a voice on Substack. So that tends to be the two types of people that come to me. Either they've already got a practice and work that they want to do and they want to see where Substack fits, or they're really interested in, like, I feel like I've got a voice, like it's at a time in my life where either, they've moved away from corporate or they've retired or something's happened and they're like, I really want to do this. Like, is this a place for me? And then because notes is talked about so much as the engine for growth, I really try and strike the balance. And I'm like, if you were going to pour your best work into something that you want to write, what does that look like? Does that look like sitting for a month in research? Does that look for like being with a community for a while and seeing what bounces off the people that want to read about this? Like, what does it actually look like? Because that's always going to be there. And I think it'll be really reassuring to people to hear that you said, I might put a note out there and it might drive a couple of paid subscribers, because the other side of it is people are like, I'll just keep putting notes out there until people come into my Substack. And then once I've got them in my Substack, I'll just keep writing to them until eventually. And it's like, you can rewrite all of that and you can do your best work and eventually people will find it. They
Yeah,
found it
and
before notes.
yeah, for sure. I mean, to me, the whole point of Substack is still about the writing, the quality of the writing, and
Yeah.
I don't like apps at all. I just don't like reading on a little phone. I have a 28-inch Mac screen, and I love that. I can see the whole
Mhm.
world on my Mac screen. So I like to go to my Substack and see the page,
Mhm.
and that feels real to me. It's like, look, here's all this stuff on my page
Yeah.
that I have written and that I have organized and what have you. And I would say to anybody who is trying to start out, focus on that. Focus on creating something that's kind of beautiful and easy to navigate, but populate it with a body of really good work, whatever your work is,
Mm.
whether it's writing or some other kind of content creation. Make sure you've got some really good stuff there, because if you attract attention on notes and somebody says, "Oh, I wonder who that person is," and they go to your
Mm.
Substack and there's nothing there, then you've lost them, and you might have actually lost them forever, because they'll look at you again and think, "Oh, I already went there and it wasn't very interesting." So I
Mm.
think getting that body of work there ready to go with no expectations at all at the beginning is really, really important. And then, go out there and start talking about it. And when people come to find you, they'll think, "Oh, that's who she is or he is." And it'll be
Mm.
something
And
tangible.
that's it, isn't it? Creating that online home that feels like a place that you were really proud to invite people to. I talk about this a lot because energetically it makes a big difference. If somebody mentions my website, I'm like, oh, my website, yeah, I do need to, it's that thing, it's always in the back of my mind that I need to update my website. But with Substack, I'm like, I know that I've curated it all and people can find what they need, because actually I've had to do that because otherwise it's a nightmare with customer service. So making sure that people can easily navigate around and they feel welcome, and also that it puts people off. I need to put some people off, otherwise it would just be lots of people that didn't make the community as cohesive as it is. So
Right.
yeah, love that. I'm going to ask a question from my member. This is from Amy Beeson, who runs the London Writers Meetups. Lovely Amy. She's written a question like a journalist. I'm just going to read it out. It's quite
Okay.
funny, but I did smile. I was like, I'm just going to read it verbatim as she wants to ask it. So she says, your work weaves myth, place, and personal transformation so beautifully. How do you advise writers to root their own stories more deeply?
Well, I wonder what she means by that, to root it more deeply in anything, or does she mean to root it more deeply in place, do you think?
Yeah, so it's more deeply, I think the sense was more deeply in who they are,
Okay.
who they are and like at this moment.
I think it's always got to come down to, I'm going to answer it a different way if that's okay.
Yeah,
I
of
think it's
course,
always
Sharon,
got
yeah.
to come down to what what you can't live with unless you get it out in some way. To me, writing comes out kind of automatically rooted if it's an essential act.
Mhm.
If it's something that you just have to say, that you really feel kind of viscerally that this is something that you have that's unique, that's, whatever way it might be unique, that you really have to express. And I think if it is that, rather than, oh, I want to be, what I'm trying to do is distinguish that from, oh, I want to be a writer, what could I write about in order to
Mhm.
be a writer? It's like, no, I have somehow to get this out into the world, whatever this is, whether it's memoir, whether it's a love of place, whether it's a passion for stories. Then I think that sense of I can't be if I don't get it out there is what really drives that sense of
Mhm.
rootedness. And it's
Mhm.
so different. for everybody. And I think a lot of people who want to write make the mistake, and I did when I was very, very much younger. I didn't write my novel till I was 40.
Mm.
And I tried in my 30s to write for the market. I don't know what it was. Agus sagas. Do you remember Agus sagas?
No.
Okay, yeah, you're probably too young for that. They were kind of, it was a brand of fiction that was written for kind of middle class women in the countryside who'd moved to these cottages where they all had Argas in their
Oh,
gardens,
okay.
and they became known as Argus Sagas. And I thought, oh, that's great. They're selling it. I didn't have anything to say. I'd never seen an Arga, I don't think. But, it's that whole sense of, oh, I want to be a writer. I want to write fiction. I know I can do it. I can write. I'm a good writer. I'll write that. But my heart wasn't in it. I didn't have anything remotely to offer in that field. And it wasn't until I had my third midlife crisis when I was living
Oh,
in
there's more
America.
coming. Don't tell me
Oh
that,
yeah,
Sharon.
oh yeah. I did a whole bunch of them. And
Oh.
to cut a long story short, I decided to learn to fly to overcome a fear of flying
Mm.
and probably of life. And I did that, and it was the most transformative thing I'd ever done. It changed everything. I was a girl from a council estate in Hartlepool, the northeast, not too far
Not too far from
from
me.
where you are.
Yeah. Hmm.
And it's just like people didn't do that kind of stuff. I had a difficult childhood. It didn't feel safe. I was frightened of everything. I never felt secure. I was always looking for the safe job. And if I finally figured out in my late 30s, if I don't do something to get myself out of that, I'm just never going to be anything that I want to be.
Mm.
What was I frightened of? Flying. So I learned to fly. It was bonkers, really. But it changed everything. And then I had a story to tell. I
Mm.
had a story about transforming fear. I had a story about transformation in general. And I
Mm.
had a story about how story comes into that and the stories that we tell about ourselves and how we get out of that victim mentality. So it was it was really, I was waiting for something to happen in my life, I guess, that gave me that imperative. I've got to write this story now. And then I've never really looked back. So I think that's a really long-winded and possibly not very relevant answer to
No, it's
the
brilliant. I
question.
mean, I'm just nodding along. I know Amy will adore that as well because I think we know each other quite well now. And I think one of the things we've both talked about is some of the stories that have to be told and that come out almost feel like this is so, so important. And then once it's out, it's like, where do you go? And actually, what you're saying is, you've not looked back. So maybe for us, as we are kindling these other stories and as we are letting go more of all of the layers or all of the shoulds or whatever's going on, maybe that was just one of the stories that kindled a sense of, free flying, I guess, for want of a better expression, because I think we've both felt that. And now we're like, oh, but now what? And then the internet, right? Because it, as we've talked about, it just does, if you're not careful, it does just shift everything, and it can be quite discombobulating to then be a person who opens a laptop and writes on the internet rather than a writer, because I do think they are separate. They can be the same, but they are separate.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, for people who want to actually write books, who want to be writers as a kind of profession,
Yeah.
um, it is incredibly hard. I don't know a writer that doesn't feel like it's pulling teeth every time in the morning you open the Word document, which contains your putative novel or non-fiction book or whatever it might be. And it's just like, it's excruciating. And yet it's beautiful at the same time when it works and the words come and you look back at a sentence that you've written and, you feel happy with it. But it's not easy. And I think in order for that to be sustainable, it's incredibly hard work. You've got to be writing about what you have a real passion for
Mm,
and what feels like part of your life.
mm,
And perhaps that's true writing for the internet as well. I don't know. I've never actually done that. I've always kind of
mm.
approached this as a kind of professional writer. That's my day job.
Yeah.
But it requires the passion and it requires you to really interrogate what it is that you have to bring that nobody else can. And I don't mean
Mm,
a whole new subject area because there's no new thing under the sun, as we both know,
mm,
but your particular unique insight into it, your slant on it, your way of offering it so that somebody will think, oh, I never thought of it like that before.
mm, And what's really beautiful, and I've heard you speak live as well, at Annick Story Fest, is how much you circle back to the stories and where they came from in your younger years and that background that you had and how that shaped you. And I feel that we don't hear enough of that. And so one of the things that I found really difficult when I was first taking up space online was how much to talk about being from the Northeast, from a working class background, because I'd spent most of my career masking that fact.
Yeah.
And so when I heard you speak about it, I was sat next to my mum in the auditorium, and I just felt myself relax, next to her. She's obviously, she loves your work as well. And we're just there going, oh, it's all okay. Like, it's all okay. Just that sense of feeling reassured that we are allowed to take up space and we are allowed to have our take on how things have impacted or whatever, wherever the story's flown out. So I want to say personal thank you for that. But also to anybody else that's listening, we have to be brave, I don't know whether you felt it was brave, like when you circle back to that and when you tell people about your background, it still feels massively brave to me. I'm not quite there yet with it.
Don't think I feel it's brave. I mean, it kind of, I was the first one in my family to go to university,
Yeah.
and then I got a fairly high-flying corporate job. Did a PhD, and kind of moved in kind of academic and scientific circles, and then I got a fairly high-flying corporate job and was basically hanging out with, fairly senior people, a lot of people who'd been
Mm,
in senior positions overseas, and I didn't need necessarily have the background,
yeah.
to engage in those relationships, but I was very good at watching and listening and
Mm,
learning. And I would have found it difficult at that point, I think, to really say to someone who had been, part of whose father had been part of the Raj in India or whatever, that I
mhm,
came from a council estate in Hartlepool. If I was asked, I
mhm.
would, I would never lie, but
Okay.
I wouldn't have actually volunteered it. But now I am immensely proud of
Yeah.
my working class background because I
Mhm,
look at what is wrong with the world
mm,
and what is lacking in the world today. And although it was very, very warty, it was not always pretty, but
mm,
that sense of community
mhm,
and taking care of each other's kids if you didn't have enough to eat, that sense of pride in work.
mhm,
When you could, and if you couldn't, then you looked after each other. And just that sense of normal everyday things, everyday life, just
mhm,
simple stuff, being something to be really proud of.
mhm,
And I look back at that and it's just like that was amazing.
mhm,
I'm so glad that I had that.
mhm.
And I look back at the rich culture, and there was a rich culture. It
Oh,
was a
yeah.
different
Hmm.
culture. But the songs and the kind of the music and the jokes and the insults and all of that kind of thing. And I'm incredibly proud of it. So now it doesn't feel brave at all. It just
Mm,
feels like something I really want to share.
hmm, hmm. It's beautiful. I wanted to talk a little bit about boundaries, Sharon, because, and I hope you don't mind me saying, but when you are a bestseller on Substack, it's either 101 paid subscribers, 1,001 paid subscribers, or tens of thousands of paid subscribers. And Substack give us these little check marks that we can display next to our name. So you have one displayed next to your name that means over 1,000 paid subscribers, which is a lot of customers, a lot of people who have opted into paying a monthly or an annual subscription to feel part of something with you. And I wanted to talk about how that has all felt as that's been building, or did it all build at once? Do you have a team to help you with the admin on it? Have you had to firm up any boundaries around how people can contact you, or is it a bit more hands off? I'd just love to know how it all works. And I know others will be fascinated because we do hold ourselves back because it can feel quite scary to get up into those numbers of customers.
It's kind of, I mean, I just need to say that, I'm 64 years old,
Mm,
and I've had some success in writing now for, well, yeah, I would say since 2008, since the first book in a
yeah.
sense. So I'm kind, and I've had a following, a good following for a while. So
Mm,
what I'm going to say is something that's been hard won.
yeah.
Um, I am. This sounds really big-headed, but I am perfectly boundaried. I
Mm,
haven't always been, but now I am exactly clear on what I can give and what I won't give,
yeah.
and how I will interact with people and be able to feel generous about it,
Hmm.
and how I won't, so that I don't feel resentful about it. And that's
Yeah.
taken me a long time of, many years of having a decent following to learn. So for me, it's very much about, yes, if I'm inviting comments on a Substack article, if I'm engaged in a Zoom gathering, then I'm absolutely going to give it my all. I'm going to comment
Mm,
back wherever I have anything to say, and
mhm.
I'm going to allow a really kind of open engagement. I don't allow people to email me and
Yeah.
expect my time,
Hmm.
because I would get nothing done. I would just get nothing done, or to ask me questions or for advice or whatever. And it's not that I'm a mean person, but it's just that I have to have a life. And I think you have to know when to just say, okay, for the money that you are paying for my Substack, which in my case, it's £70 a year,
Hmm.
you are getting an awful lot of content, and you're getting a lot of invitations to kind of live gatherings where you can interact with me. And I think that's enough. I do think, and again, forgive me if this sounds kind of self-serving or whatever, but I do think I'm giving quite good value for money. And I know that if I gave more, I would break. And
Mm,
so that, and I have had so many struggles in my life, Claire, trying to find a balance
mm,
of and trying to learn how to say no. And now I am
mm,
so good at saying no
mm,
nicely. But
mhm,
just like I understand, and part of it I think was like, I almost died of lymphoma during the pandemic, which was edifying. I didn't. Everything's all right now. But that really focuses the mind.
mm,
And so I'm not going to risk the stress and the overwhelm anymore. It's just not worth it. So I think for anybody who's not in my position of having had quite a big following for a long time, it's really important to think about this as you're going along.
mm,
To just look at just be aware of how it makes you feel to be in this situation or that situation, to have that level of engagement or not. And
mm,
just don't let anything break you, because it's not worth it. It really isn't worth it. And that boundary is different for everyone. And I do think it takes a bit of practice. Nobody's going to hit it right the first time. We're all going to have a little bit of overwhelm, particularly when we're trying to build up a following. But it's so important to understand what you can and what you can't give. And I really do feel, kind of for the first time in my life, at the grand age of 65, that I've got it in a place where I'm happy and comfortable.
mm,
I don't have a team.
mhm,
I don't really have anything very much for a team to do, to be honest. I
mhm,
do have a good friend who will act as a kind of intermediary sometimes, who will answer very simple questions, that people have lost their password or whatever, and it's just, even if it's just going back and saying, "Sorry, I can't help you. You've got to go to Substack." And part of that is protection. To be
mhm,
honest, it's not that I couldn't sit and do the work, but I
mhm,
do feel at some level of exposure and visibility as a
mm,
writer, you've got to protect yourself from, because if you respond as an individual, then you'll get into a conversation. How do you turn it off without being rude? So it feels for me not like I'm trying to tell people I'm not interested in them. It's just I can't. I just can't be.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I have my friend who kind of acts as that barrier for me on really, really simple stuff, and then I engage when I can.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. It's so beautiful to hear about Sharon because I wouldn't have known any of that, you know. It's like this mystery of how to hold more. And it's not more as in more dynamics, more people, more money. It's not even that. It's the more is what comes through us. And I definitely have felt that this year where I just wanted to turn it all off. I was like, I just want to turn this all off now. And actually, I did a bit of a re-steer because there was a lot of complicated feelings I had towards Substack as a company, towards what was happening on the platform, towards what was happening with the dynamics of all of the stuff that I was holding space for. But it was like everything at once. And then hearing you speak so articulately about the timeline, about the embodiment, about the separation, about the boundaries is just very, very reassuring. And you're so right. Obviously, you've got to live through some of it to understand how you want to steer that ship, but it is still it feels impossible, you know, until you're in it. And then once you're in it, you're like, this is a runaway train. I don't know what to do. So I'm very grateful that you've been able to articulate that wisdom back to us. And hopefully it'll help people to feel more expansive about a longer term journey rather than the kind of push for the vanity metrics of numbers or the push for whatever it is that is driving people on the internet to push. They can more relax into the wisdom of their work, is my hope.
Yeah, and I think it does require practice, but I think it is all just very much about listening to your body and how it makes you feel when a particular interaction comes in that you don't have time for, and just saying, okay, that's what somehow I've got to find a way around without being rude to people or without giving people the impression that you're not interested in them. It's just you can't be interested in, 57,000 people,
Yeah.
for example. You just
Yeah.
can't. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that practice of the work that you do and your working week, obviously you've told us before in the conversation you were saying about opening the Word document and it's sitting there. But is there a kind of structure to that week where it's about the writing and then it's about the Substack and then you might do some interviews and things like that? Or do you just tend to go with the flow and see how the week pans out and what you feel like writing?
Very much depends on whether I'm writing a book at the time. I'm not writing a
Mm-hmm.
book all the time, so a book might take me a year to write, and then I'll generally have a year before I kind of start another one, ish. When I'm writing a book, I'm a terrible crammer. It's like exams at school. I'd leave it to the last minute, and so I might have a contract where I've got a year to hand in the book, and I'll spend 6 months playing and then I'll panic and write it all in the last 6 months. Now, that's functional for me because I do write better under pressure. If I've
Mm-hmm.
got too much time, I can't focus. But it means that, in that time when I'm writing a book, that's all encompassing.
Yeah.
And I have to be able to give it absolute priority. Now, I get up at a ridiculous time. I get up at 4:15 in the morning normally, and I can only write in the morning. By the time it gets to this time of day, I'm just brain dead,
Yeah.
It doesn't
Mm.
work. So I've got to really protect my mornings as much as I can. So, and then I would, Substack. I do clearly put a lot of work into my Substack, but it's not as difficult as writing a book, if I can put it that way, because,
Mm.
you're not trying to make a coherent 80,000 words. You're trying to make a coherent 2,000 words, which also relates to your work, which is, very much easier. And so Substack is easier to slot in. And yeah, I mean, when you've got a book out and you're doing publicity, then you can't do anything else very much. And I find Substack easier to work around.
Mm.
I can squeeze it in a way that I couldn't if I were writing a book. So that means I guess there's not quite so much
Mm.
structure. It's very rare. Sometimes, I mean, maybe twice a year, I'll just have a week where I can't. I
Mhm.
try to write something every week for paid subscribers. And every now and again, it's just like, yeah, I'm just going to write something that's really shit, so I'm not going to do
Yeah.
that. But mostly I enjoy it, and I've got something to say, weirdly. And it kind of flows, and sometimes it can just be an idea. It doesn't have to be a 2,000 word essay. Sometimes it can just be, I read that and I was thinking about that.
Mm.
What do you all think? Have you ever thought that before? So I
Mhm.
like to vary the kind of stuff that I offer Substack as well.
It's a beautiful container to say that to yourself as well, that the Substack container is there, the weekly container in your case, that you probably will write something for paid subscribers. But obviously, if you don't, there's a whole container in the archive of all of the other things that
Exactly.
have been written. So it's fine, isn't it? And this is what
Hope
I
so.
always try and reassure people, like we're writing, yes, we can write something fresh, but there's so much old gold and there's so much stuff that when we have gone along a further timeline, we might need to circle back to, or we might want to circle back to, or we might completely forgot that we've read. So there's
Yeah.
all of those gifts as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Sharon, for talking to me today. It's been so wonderful to learn more about your writing process and how everything fits with Substack. I wish you a lovely close of the year. I know we're heading in there now, and we're about to hit December in a couple of weeks. So I hope your end of year is really peaceful. And thank you so much for all that you gift out into the world, your books and your wonderful Substack.
Thank you, Claire, and the same back to you in all senses.
Thank you.